If there's one thing you can say about socialists is they're so arrogant and so assured of themselves, yet these are people who have never touched an economics textbook in their life, and of course sheep in the box is no exception to this. Much like that of socialists I've done responses on, such as Joe Scott, Ryan Hibbs, Second Thought, Viki 1999, Mouthy Infidel, you'll typically find that they describe capitalism for what they're living under today, and this is just something that you're going to typically find with socialists. They're so desperate to try and correlate capitalism with corporatism, or if it's not calling capitalism the same thing, they're trying to say that capitalism's the early stages of corporatism. Complete and utter silly nonsense, of course. This is no different with this of sheep in the box. He makes a concession.
This is an almost universally accepted sentiment and value to the point where, even in the most individualistic and capitalistic nations like the US, education is free and readily available to all, and why, in charity drives in the third world, schools are one of the most in-demand projects, because an educated nation is, by and large, a more prosperous one.
To clarify the concession that he's more or less acknowledging the fact when he says that, of course, it's a strongly capitalistic nation, even although it's not, forget that point for a second. He's more or less saying it's this strongly capitalistic nation and it's individualist, right? And the reason that is so important and why that is such a big concession to make is because if you look at the dictionary definitions of individualism here, the dictionary definition, you can see it's all about the freedom for state control. Again, you could look at the other dictionary definition of individualism and you can see that it basically means that it's free state control. In other words, free from government's regulation for the market to basically regulate itself. You've got those two types of regulation. You've got the government's regulation, you've got the market regulating itself. You can generally tell how strongly capitalist a country is by how strongly the private sector's left be to regulate itself. He's actually conceding to the fact, yes, capitalism is an individualist system. And again, you could look at the dictionary definition, capitalism itself. You can see that individualism is listed. You also see that it mentions about private individual ownership. It's free for state control. The state's not the one directing and controlling the economy. It's free from the state. It means private individual ownership being left be to regulate itself. That's an important distinction to make because these socialists are utterly obsessed at trying to twist the entire meaning of capitalism and correlate it to this system that we see today. He'd be fair to somebody like Joe Scott. Joe Scott seems like a nice enough guy, so he's a bit of an exception. Most of these, socialists you'll find just like that of, Second Thought or Viki 1999, you try to reason with these people, but they've got such pent up emotion and this arrogance. They love to talk a lot about what they actually know absolutely nothing at all, and you'll pretty much find that with folk like Sheep in the Box. He's utterly clueless. He doesn't have the first clue of what capitalism is, but there he is. He's describing capitalism for what you live under today, and it just isn't the case.
Is it water with the sheep in the box?
That intro for a start, man, it's just...
Education, I'm sure you would agree, regardless of your specific ideology, is important for a number of reasons, not least of which because an educated populace is an empowered and intellectually curious one.
So it's rather quite funny he starts going on about an educated populace and whatnot. At least he acknowledges there's a problem today with the education system in Britain. Now, of course, Scotland is slightly different for that of, England and Wales. We've got your free education and your free tuition fees and all the rest of this nonsense. I can tell you for first hand, my time having gone through, the state education system. In my 6 years at high school, I must have went through all 110 different teachers. There's your world-class socialist free education system for you. Most of the time the teachers weren't even there to help you. There you go. When you talk about England, Wales, sure they've got private schools and whatever, and of course they do have the state education and whatever. But that's what I don't understand about his argument. He's trying to critique capitalism, but here he is banging off about the state education system, and it just doesn't make logical sense to me. I can't even make heads or tails out of his entire argument. But in his argument, he's saying, oh, well, it's preparing them for capitalist system you live under today, apparently. What capitalist system? We're living under a mixed economy where socialism ripped the arse right out the private sector. That's why the private sector costs are through the roof.
Even when they aren't really necessary to carry out the role, and considering that the things we're taught in school often stick with us for the rest of our lives and can continue to hold sway over our futures, honestly, if your aim is to normalise certain values or influence future generations or to ensure the dominance of a particular status quo, well, the education system is probably the most effective way of doing so long term, as authoritarian regimes the world over have shown again and again.
See, the thing I don't even understand of what he's trying to get at, he's going on about this today with the education and then brings up about the authoritarianism. These authoritarian regimes were socialist, and what these regimes like that of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union did was they nationalised the education system. And I've provided a video, and you can go and check out my video today with the state education. The history of where state education actually came from was used as a tool for political indoctrination. That was the purpose behind state education. That's why they used it, because then you can collectively force society under one education system, one curriculum, and you've got the power to then politically indoctrinate them. And the purpose of state education to prepare them so that when they leave school they are subservient to the state. And this correlates to this with collectivism, because if you differentiate individualism and collectivism in practice, and we're not talking about the theoretical nonsense, because of course he eventually, brings up theoretical nonsense, right? When you're talking about in practice and what collectivism actually is, it's placing the state as the main element of the economy, and the purpose of the people collectively is to serve the state. Like I says, the only individualist system that's ever existed is capitalism. So when you're talking about this of imperialism, colonialism, fascism, feudalism, Nazism, communism, doesn't matter where you look where collectivism has been, you will always find that the state has always been the main element of the economy, and it's never been anything else other than that. These socialists could always go on about that of the Paris Commune that was short-lived, or that today with the so-called anarchist Catalonia. Both of them resorted to violence and economic terrorism, basically. But of course they try to paint another story, and that's typical of socialists. They always do that with history. They even try to tell you that the Holodomor was caused by, it's just poor weather conditions. They're a laughing stock. But it's the fact that he brings up about the authoritarianism. It doesn't make sense to me, because they were socialist regimes and they had the state education system, and what's that got to do with capitalism anyway? Absolutely nothing.
But the problem there is the lack of subtlety. As we've discussed previously, however, capitalism is often extremely effective at being subtle with its propaganda.
He's going on about the state education system, although he doesn't say that directly. He doesn't say state education. He later on mentions about private education as the alternative. That's how you can tell he's merely speaking about the state education system. So how the hell can he talk about that of capitalist indoctrination when he's talking about the state education system? Capitalism's got nothing at all to do with this of the state education system. We don't have free market education. No, even the private schools is anything at all to do with the free market education. But he wants you to believe that somehow you're living under this capitalist system today, and that, the private ownership you've got today is somehow free market.
Let's say you're going to invent an education system from scratch, ignoring our current system and preconceptions. What kinds of things, given our current system and society, would you prioritise, and how does this differ from the way things currently are? Ethics? Taxes maybe? Budgeting? Laws and civil rights? Basic political education? DIY maybe? How much of what you learned at school is essentially pointless to a majority of your life?
You see, this is the problem, folk. What's that got to do with capitalism? Well, that's proof that you're living in the absence of capitalism, because a free market education system, you go directly to what you want to learn, such as like what you do in college, similar in many regards, although it's more to do with actual subjects that apply to, the job market. That's the great thing about a free market education system. Back in the 19th century in the United States of America, they had a 95% literacy rate as a result of the free market education system, and of course it was dirt cheap. That contradicts their entire narrative, because, it's because of private ownership that the reason why it's so expensive. I heard somebody on Instagram, and he's going on about the housing, and he's saying it's actually because it's for profits, and that's the reason why. For profits means they can just shaft the consumer and drive the prices up. Well, no really, because economic reality proves that it's down to the laws of supply and demand. That's the very reason why in Detroit, when everybody was fleeing and leaving Detroit, the house prices dropped dramatically. And it wouldn't matter about capitalists if they try to sell housing. What they're going to do? Drive the prices of Detroit's housing up. How's that going to sell the housing if nobody wants to live there? They honestly don't even understand even the fundamental basics of economics. They don't have a clue about prices. They've never studied the role of prices in their life. They don't even have a clue what the economic calculation problem is. Haven't got a clue about prices at all. Couldn't even tell you what profits or losses are. But they want to tell you that the reason things are expensive is because, it was privatised. It's because it's for profits. It's because it's greed. Not I thought today with greed. So it's the laws of supply and demand. It's just like what I was explaining with those for Grime for Corbyn. It's the exact same mentality. They really do think class, because they've not even got a clue what they're talking about. So it's no the fault of capitalism for why we've got this mess. First and foremost, it's important to note you've got individual responsibility. It's your individual responsibility for what you go and study. Common sense would tell you, if you look at the job market, you're going to go and study something that you know you're going to get a job at the end of it, right? Somebody with common sense would know that. See, socialists would go in and study something like gender studies. You show me somewhere in the job market where they offer jobs for stuff like that. That's the laughable thing about these people. They don't even understand that they are the problem, because they don't understand individual responsibility, and that's something you'll find with socialists. Socialists never take responsibility for their own actions. They've always got to blame somebody else for everything that they cause. Take, for example, Venezuela. They caused the food shortage crisis, they caused the blackout crisis. Even during the time period between 1998 to 2008, when there was an oil boom, what did the socialists try to do? They turned around and says to you, that was all to do with United States getting Saudi Arabia to ramp up oil production, and somehow oil prices dropped and it caused a food shortage crisis. Because if that was the case, then how come the food shortage crisis immediately followed price ceilings, basically socialist price controls in 2003, during the period when there was an oil boom? Honestly, they're so religious of their ideology. It doesn't matter about anybody. It doesn't matter about your life. It doesn't matter about the betterment of society. They're not interested in that, right? They just want to protect their religious ideology, and you can see that if you look back in history to the likes of the Soviet Union. That's exactly what they did. Anytime socialism created a problem in the Soviet Union, they would find a scapegoat. In other words, what that means, they would find somebody else to basically blame for it, and that person would end up getting basically brutally murdered, tortured and murdered. Protecting its reputation, protecting the name of socialism is more important to us than, of course, that person's life. That really just sums socialism up to a T.
Unfortunately, the answer is that, in all likelihood, in a lot of cases, it's to stop us questioning the status quo too much.
And again, he's not even speaking about a capitalist system. And under a capitalist system, you've got a free market in education. Students are encouraged to think independently for themselves, to do independent research and whatnot. You've only got wee subtle bits of that the day, right? But most commonly, see, when it comes to the state education system, which by the way is socialist, they have a structured system, so teachers, in other words, are forced basically to provide a curriculum that the state dictates. So what the state says goes. That's socialism. That's got nothing at all to do with capitalism. Basically, the state education system, they criticise anybody who tries to think for themselves. And that's all part of state education.